Hey cats, what's happening? You know, when you own a house, the work never ends. There's always something more to be done. If it isn't the yard, there's things that need to be done on the house itself. And today, I'm going to tackle one of those chores. On the back deck, and the back deck's seen its weathering, we have this bench that I built in years ago. And we like to sit on it, but you'll see over the years, it's got, a lot of splintering. You can see where fabrics got caught on these splinters. So nobody even wants to sit on it. It's just weathered so bad over the years. You don't want to get that, if you slid on that, these are sharp. Those are like needles. So I'm going to tear this bench out today, and I've got some new lumber. I'm going to put a brand new seat on there. Brand new. It'll be a brand new bench. So first thing I got to do is take the old one off. Now, it does have a frame on the back here, and I don't want to bust that or split that out. So if I started prying on it, it's a good, these nails are old and rusty. So it's hard to tell what might happen, and I don't want to break anything. So I think I'm just going to get the chainsaw and cut these boards off and take it off that way. Now that I got the bench pulled off of there, all the scrap lumber hauled out to the campfire pit, I got a little mess here to clean up, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now what am I going to do with all of the scrap lumber? Well, I put it out here in the fire pit. We live, in a very rural surrounding, so there's no really rules or anything in Ohio about burning. But know that this is treated lumber. It's old, it's dried out, it's been there for probably 30 some years, but I'm going to burn it, and it's not something you want to sit around the campfire with because you probably don't want to breathe the smoke. I don't know what kind of chemicals they put in treated lumber, but let's burn it, get it out of the way, and it'll be done with. I've got my boards here for the bench, 2x6s by 8 foot long, and 8 foot was the size of the old bench. I chose some boards that had a pretty decent grain in them, a real fine grain, and tried to something that would weather a little better than the boards I had. So I'll find the best side and use it. Usually what you do is you look at the end and you see how you kind of got the crescent grain going there. This side usually goes down and the arch goes up, just like an arched bridge. So you always look at the end, and generally that side will go up. Sometimes though, when you are looking at a board, you might say, I don't know, this side looks a lot smoother, or there's less knots in it. So you can do that. And sometimes you'll see it goes this way on that side, But when you come down and look at the other side, you know, it could be completely opposite and flip the other way. So this one, the center of the board is right there, so it can go either way, I think, and it'll be fine. The other thing I do when I pick out lumber is, and you should always do this when you're, you know, at the lumber store, is look right down, sight right down the end of the board there, and you're looking to make sure it's not warped or bent or twisted. You know, it's got a nice straight plane right down the side. You want straight boards. You don't want boards that are already, you know, crookeder than a dog's hind leg, as they say. Now here's something else you're going to want to know about dimensional lumber. This is a 2x6. So when you measure it, it's not going to be, and it's 8 foot long. So when you measure it, it's not going to be exactly, you know, 2 inches thick by 6 inches wide. And it's not always going to be 8 foot long. So you'll see where we are here, 8.5 inches. And that allows you a little room to trim these edges off, because they're not always even. After they get kiln dried, sometimes they'll be a little crooked. So I can trim, you know, a 1/4 inch off of each side and get those squared up real nicely. You'll see here that a 2x6 is actually 5.5 inches, so it's it might have been cut roughly at 6 inches, but by the time they kiln dry it and everything, it shrinks by about 1/2 inch. The thickness is always going to be 1.5 inches too, not 2 inches. So why don't they call it 1.5 by 5.5? Good question. But if you're figuring out dimensions to build something, make sure you know the sizes are not exactly as you're buying them. Now I've trimmed and squared up all of my boards, and I got a nice square on that. I cut them all to 8 foot, so let's double check this. Pretty close. About 8 1/16, so that'll work. What do we got on this one? 8 1/16, so I think I got them all. Just a matter of a pencil mark. Okay, let's say if this is my bench and you're going to sit down on this part, I don't want a square corner right here. I want to round this a little bit and make it a little more user-friendly. So I do have a compass, but I'm going to use some backwoods ingenuity. The bottle of brake fluid. And you see it's got a nice round bottom, so that'll work. I'll just put that there. I'll take my pencil and I'll draw a nice little radius around there. Got a nice little radius mark there. I did the same thing down at that end. So this will be the front of the bench, the 3 seat boards. And then this will be the back, you know, which will stand up. But I also put a little radius here on the top corners of the back. So, you know, there won't be a sharp point there. In case somebody were to stumble or fall into it, you know, it'll be nice and rounded. And for this cut, I'm going to use the jigsaw. And it's a little hard cutting this 2x material, but it should work. Yeah, there you go. Got a nice little round corner on there, and we'll sand. Actually, we'll take the router and we'll ease those edges real nicely. Now you notice when I cut with the jigsaw, it doesn't like cut exactly, and it left this edge there, so we're gonna have to straighten that out. And even on this cut, you know, it left like a little groove there. So what I'm gonna do is use my random orbital sander. Got a sanding disc on there, and I'm just going to run the sander around this edge and try to clean that up there. And that gives us a nice smooth radius there instead of that rough. And we'll do the same thing with this one. The next tool I'm going to use here is the router. This is a router, and here's the bit here. This is a round over bit. So what we're going to do is run it along the edge here, and you see how the edge is very square there. It's going to put a nice round on there. So let's fire that up and see how that works. And you'll see the difference. It made a nice little, it took it from this sharp square and it made it nice and round there. So we'll do the same thing on this side and give us a nice even round edge all the way around. Now the last thing we're going to do is do a little bit of sanding on these before we put the bench together. Once we put it together, it's done. So easier just to do it right here before we get going. So we're going to use the random orbital sander. And you'll see there's like lumber stamps on here on any treated lumber or any lumber. So you always want to try to sand that off if you can. Well, the last step is putting it all together. I've got the bottom part there. I still got to bring the backboards out, but I'm going to attach this first. I got a little bit of a gap right there, so I'm going to use the pipe clamp, squeeze it together, and go from there. And then I've got to mark my stringers here. I'm going to put a line just so I know where to put my screws in at. I got 2.5 inch exterior deck screws I'm going to use on it, but I got to know right where to put the screws so I don't miss this thing. I want the screws to go whoop right into it. Pre-drilled all the holes. Now I'm ready to put the screws to it. Project for today. All ready to sit on and enjoy the view.